Pyongyang residents taking in their leader's latest diatribe against President Trump. Following the president's UN message earlier this week challenging North Korea, Kim Jong-Un called President Trump mentally deranged and a dotard or senile old man. He went on to say, "I will make the man holding the prerogative of the supreme command in the U.S. pay dearly for his speech calling for totally destroying the DPRK, or North Korea." According to his foreign minister, now in New York for the UN sessions, that could mean an H-bomb blast over the Pacific Ocean. President Trump responded via Twitter. Kim Jong-un of North Korea, who is obviously a madman who doesn't mind starving or killing his people, will be tested like never before. North Korean nuclear muscle flexing got the attention of Japan, too.
If they decided to conduct a hydrogen bomb test with an ICBM in the Pacific, we cannot deny the possibility it might fly over the country. These kinds of actions cannot be tolerated.
Along with the Treasury Department measures to target the funding of North Korea's missile and nuclear programs, President Trump noted yesterday China's apparent willingness to get its banks in line. Beijing today wasn't so sure.
As far as I know, what you have mentioned is not consistent with the facts. In principle, China has always implemented the Security Council's resolutions.
Cutting the cash flow to the north and its weapon development is seen as key to 28-year-old Kim Jong-un, who told us he defected from North Korea 2 years ago on a business trip via the South Korean embassy in Beijing. He claims to have worked in the government's trade and currency offices. He fled, he says, because he grew disillusioned with Kim Jong-un and had this warning about the young leader.
Maybe he's very dangerous.
Very dangerous?
Yes.
Why?
Very dangerous. He is smarter and stronger than you think. He wants to live longer. Yeah, with all the power and all the authority.
That what North Korea's leader wants to do is test a hydrogen bomb over the Pacific Ocean. Now, that could disturb a lot of electronics when that kind of thing happens. So unless that explosion is tested and telegraphed to people first, there's a distinct possibility that anyone within even miles of that test, well, their electronics could go down, which includes planes that could go down, which hastens the need to at least get a heads up. This could be very provocative, and this itself could be an act of war, according to many. The read right now from former USS Cole Commander Kurt Lippold, who joins us on the phone. Commander, I mean, obviously, Kim Jong-un would have to let people know about this in advance. Unlike some of these other launches, this is something that could endanger planes and those traveling in and around the area. But he doesn't have a history of doing that. What do you think?
Well, no, I think what we're seeing is that gradual buildup where, in fact, President Trump is putting the world on notice that this is the end of the road. That while diplomatic options still exist in squeezing him with the executive order in the financial and other industries, where if you do business with the Hermit Kingdom, you don't do business with the United States and other countries and their penalties, Kim Jong-un, while he should give the world a heads up if he were to detonate that type of a weapon in the atmosphere or even on the ocean, clearly we are not going to have any indication that he will do that. And as you mentioned, while many may consider it an act of war, I think the repercussions of doing that will speak very clearly, and then China is going to be on notice that they are going to need to do what many have advocated, including myself, for months now, which is China is going to have to engage to denuclearize that country.
But I'm wondering if the message they're getting from this rogue state is that they don't care what China thinks, and they're not intimidated by China threatening to freeze all financial ties here. And I'm wondering if this has gone a little too far here, even for the Chinese, that within hours of that agreement, Kim Jong-un is doing this, is threatening this. He obviously doesn't care.
What he threatens and what he does, Neil, I think, as usual, will be two different things. If he carries through and does it, then clearly he is breaking a benchmark as far as that test goes. And at that point, I think even Russia and China are going to say, we're having nothing to do with this guy, and they're going to stop breaking the sanctions that the United Nations passed the other day.
But what else would the world do in that event, Commander? I just want to be clear. I mean, because that is, to your point, very different than other these prior launchings and all. This would be a very provocative act. As I said, some have said a war act. But they would not be able to take that in stride, the Chinese particularly, maybe even the Russians, to your point. What did they do? Just join the growing list of sanctioned countries, or what?
I think you would see swift and immediate condemnation and action by the world community, whether it is through the UN or just a coalition that is built in coordination with China and Russia, that we would completely isolate that nation from anything going in and out. It will be terrible in that the people of North Korea will suffer, but we have to make it clear to the Kim Jong-Un regime, if you conduct that test, you probably will not be able to remain in power. Up until this point, that has always been a viable option for us, but you conduct this test, that goes a step further than anything the world is willing to tolerate. Detonating a nuclear weapon is an order of magnitude offense against the world by doing that. And I think at that point, whatever sympathy he may have from the world would disappear and be gone.
All bets would certainly be off. Kirk Lippold, Commander, thank you.
Bring in Harry Kazianis, Director of Defense Studies at the Center for the National Interest. Thank you very much for talking to us. North Korean Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho basically delivered the warning while here in New York that Kim Jong-un would have the final say on whether to detonate that hydrogen bomb over the Pacific. He calls it the highest level of hardline countermeasure in history. Now, let's talk history here in North Korea. So far, they have conducted 6 nuclear tests. All of them have been underground, never beyond its own borders. First of all, can they pull this off?
Julie, I think they can pull it off. The question is, what happens if they do? Because keep in mind, if you're talking about launching an ICBM, putting a hydrogen bomb on it, and then lobbing it into the South Pacific, that's a huge geographic area. But we have to presume, if you just pull a map out, that missile would have to probably go over Japan. It could potentially even go over Guam. It would go over a lot of space. The danger of something going wrong is immense. Keep in mind, the North Koreans have not perfected this technology yet. There's a high probability that there could be an error, a tracking error. There's so many different problems that can happen. And then imagine if that missile went down over South Korea or Japan armed with a hydrogen bomb. That is the most dangerous and escalatory thing the North Koreans can do.
Yeah, and just to put in perspective what a hydrogen bomb is, there's the atomic bomb, which is the bomb that we the U.S. dropped over Hiroshima. The hydrogen bomb, basically, you're looking at 10 tons versus 10,000 kilotons. The magnitude effect of this would be devastating for our environment if it were to actually fall into the Pacific. But instead of letting his foreign minister do the crazy talk for him, Kim actually came out, had his own direct words for President Trump, which actually led all of us to Webster Dictionary, because he called Trump a mentally deranged dotard who is unfit to hold the prerogative of supreme command of a country. Now, it's interesting because shortly after Kim's statement, Twitter tossed the question to Merriam-Webster asking for dotard's definition. And then Webster tweeted, Kim Jong-un calls Trump a mentally deranged U.S. dotard. Searches for dotard are high as a kite. Okay, so if you haven't looked it up, I have for you. And here's the definition of a dotard. It's a person in his or her dotage. What the heck is dotage? So then I looked that up, and that means a state or period of senile decay marked by decline of mental poise and alertness. I don't even have words. Should we be worried?
I think we have to. I mean, what I'm really nervous about here, Julie, is we're descending into really uncharted waters with North Korea. We have been through many different crises with North Korea. If you go back to 2012, 2013, if you go back to the 1990s, you go back to the Cold War, the actual threat of the North Koreans to do an atmospheric test of a hydrogen bomb is unprecedented. Nobody does atmospheric tests of nuclear weapons anymore for a very simple reason. You're spreading radioactive fallout potentially all over the planet. You're going to have lots of people who are going to end up getting cancer, having all sorts of thyroid problems, because radioactivity spreads globally through the oceans, through the winds. It's terrible.
It's no shocker North Korea is responding this way. We could have all predicted this one, considering President Trump this week threatened to destroy North Korea if provoked. But to that, Kim responded to Trump's remarks saying this, that Trump convinced me rather than frightening or stopping me that the path I chose is correct and that it is the one I have to follow to the last. He also described the president as a rogue and a gangster fond of playing with fire. How would Pyongyang conduct a nuclear test over the Pacific? And then ultimately, what impact would it have specifically for those people living on the West Coast who are watching this back and forth rhetoric and are thinking and praying that this doesn't actually happen and scared?
Well, what they could do is, I mean, it's a question of do they have the range and do they have the guidance systems to go that far? Because obviously the South Pacific is a huge geographic area. So they would have to pick a place on the map essentially that's depopulated, that there's no islands, that there's no native populations there. But the challenge with all of this is, as we know, radioactivity spreads all over the planet. And this is why nobody does these type of tests anymore. So we have to be concerned. The other thing we have to keep in mind is Kim might be bluffing. Remember, he didn't attack Guam or fire missiles near Guam, and he said he would. What he could do in this scenario is fire an ICBM, not nuclear armed, but literally drop its payload, 200-300 miles off the coast of the West Coast to prove that he has the range to hit the United States. I think that's a real possibility.
All right, Harry Kazianis, thank you very much. You're not a dotard.
Thanks.
John, you on the other hand, that's up for debate.
The jury is still out on that. Thanks for teaching me a new word.
You're
Julie
welcome.
and Kim Jong-Un.
You're welcome, teacher Julie.